Well, welcome to Morning Coffee with Kyle, that time where I catch a cup of coffee and spend a few minutes with a friend and colleague, and we visit and talk about life and ministry. And I am so excited to introduce to you today my friend and colleague and professor, Jonathan Carroll. When I was a student at Louisville Seminary, we had, of course, a number of different professors, faculty members who taught the seminars and other elective courses. But in their program, there was an adjunct faculty member that followed us all the way through our seminars, and that was Jonathan. And he made an incredible difference in the self-reflection and the academic reflection that I did during that program. And I am thrilled to be able to spend a little bit of time with him today. But I want him to tell you about the work that he does, and we'll have some more conversation about that. So, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Well, it's good to see you, Kyle. It's been a long time. Thanks for the invitation to have me. So I'm Jonathan Carroll, and I am a Presbyterian minister where I've served in churches in Virginia and in Kentucky. My most recent pastorate was a 10-year stint at the First Presbyterian Church in Owensboro, Kentucky. And at the end of 10 years, I graciously left with my heart high and good relationships in order to make a shift. So I became licensed in the Commonwealth of Kentucky as a pastoral counselor, which is what I do on a daily practice. I own my own private practice in downtown Owensboro, where I see clients and patients from every age and every walk of life with various and sundry questions and challenges and messes, and even some with some sicknesses. And I love absolutely everything about it. I'm married to Joy, and together we have 4 girls aged 18 to 11. So we are in the thick of it in every possible way.
Well, thanks for joining in, and I wanted to visit with you a little bit, partly thinking about your work and the expertise you bring to some of the conversations that maybe a lot of people are having right now, particularly related to where we are in the middle, and it probably is the middle, but this time of pandemic. And I was just saying to you a minute ago that I feel like people are way past done with this. I know there's been a lot of conversation for months now about mental health and wellness, and that's important. It's one thing to say, we all need to tend to that in the midst of this time that leads to depression and anxiety and fear and frustration. It's sort of another thing to actually do something about that. And I wanted maybe to pick your brain a little bit today about what things that people like those in my congregation or whoever might be tuning in can do to look after themselves in the midst of this. You are a bit of an expert, I think, or you're my expert in thinking about how we care for ourselves and what we might do as best practices for that. So is there anything you can think of to share with my crowd that would be helpful?
Yeah, well, I hope so. First things first, though, how are you in the midst of this months-long situation in which we find ourselves?
Well, thank you for asking. I'll tell you, and maybe this is familiar to some. In some of my conversations with colleagues, one of the things we've really noted is it seems like we're on this curve all the time, where there's a boost of energy and kind of a rush to get a lot done, and then we just bottom out and fall into this moment of sluggishness and lethargy and just frustration about, this feels like it's always an uphill push. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think the answer to the question is sort of what moment I'm in the midst of that. I'll tell you, I'm tired of being on the roller coaster. I'm tired of the pushing up and going down. And so I maybe I'll lump myself in with the crowd that I just am way past done. And things don't seem to be getting easier for those of us who are kind of leading a group, leading a church through this stressful time where we feel pulled in all directions. So that's kind of how I am. I mean, I'm making it. I'm
Yeah.
above water, but there's
Yeah.
a lot of waves.
Well, you're describing what has been referred to now as pandemic fatigue. And, I think absolutely everybody, literally everybody worldwide, which is kind of an interesting concept because very few things ever have bound the entire globe and the global population the way this has. Unfortunately, it's not an overtly positive bonding. It's been quite scary and deadly for many, but bonding nonetheless. So when we say this is everybody, we mean literally everybody is experiencing the same kind of thing. And the sad thing is, we're kind of done with it, and it doesn't seem like it's done with us. I think our being done with it has led to some relaxation of some of the worth of sacrifices that some of us have made relative to not seeing people, not being around them, not getting together with people we love and care about, not attending worship person. And I think we've washed our hands and literally everything else that's come in our homes, and we've tried to figure out what it means to have some degree of normalcy in the midst of it. And some people have begun to relax that. And I know in my community, while the numbers aren't spiking per se, I'm seeing a lot of adolescents, teenagers, high school students who are getting together with friends. And we're seeing a kind of a slight spike in cases because of that. So the teenagers are the ones who at the moment are kind of springing. So, and this is for whatever reason it's become politicized. There are people who seem to fall on one side or the other. Is this made up? Is this everyone wanting to shut down the economy, or is the legitimate health scare? And do we need it? You name it, you can conceive of it. There is someone out there who believes it. So number one thing for me with regard to self-care in the time of a pandemic is to limit our exposure to the news. There is plenty out there, much of it to be believed, much of it not. I don't know, though, even though if it were all believable, I don't know how much it is healthy for us to expose ourselves to it constantly. And, we live in a world of not only just 24-hour news, we live in a world of constant fetch and push with our phone notifications, and it's boom, 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 constantly bombarded with news, sound bites, headlines, none of which really is designed to kind of edify or build us up. Most of it's designed to kind of warn us, and even in some more nefarious ways to scare us. So I'd encourage people to read the news rather than watch it, because I think you take away a little bit of the bite of the drama and the conflict that you see in cable news shows, whichever you prefer. I'd prefer you read it than watch it. I wouldn't recommend doing that very long. And I would limit, and I do this for myself, exposure to social media, because it's, again, a constant play of the interactions of people, many of whom are rather disgruntled. So if I'm feeling really bad and I surround myself with a bunch of people who are feeling really bad, now we all exponentially feel worse. So that's two kind of quick things that we can do: limit exposure to news, limit exposure to social media.
Yeah, I am right with you on that. I have taken what I initially described as a summer sabbatical from social media. I'm only on it for posting, church-related things and posting my pictures, because people love to see pictures of my daughter, or at least they tell me so. So I'm limiting that, and I think what I'm hoping to do coming out of the other side of that is to really just funnel it down to a trickle, just going forward. It's too much for me. I have people, my spouse, others in my life who are constantly coming to me, telling me the things they're seeing on there. And I listen and I care, but my response is almost always, it would probably be better if you weren't spending your energy reading these things too, because of how much it frustrates and consternates you.
Yeah.
And
it can be a very negative place to be. And I think right now, from a psychological perspective, we need to be proactive about managing our negativity.
Mm.
It's a part of life. It's not Pollyanna. Positive thinking can't completely take away some of that negativity. It's there. The facts are not altogether encouraging sometimes, but we manage that negativity largely by managing our exposure to it and then reframe how we think about it. So I think a very important thing, kind of psychologically speaking, is to reframe some of the negative input and redirect it toward a more kind of grateful output. So I encourage people to scan their lives, their worlds, their families, their homes, their social context, whatever that might look like, to scan them for what is going on in them that is good and holy and beautiful and true, because that's the news that's kind of worth listening to, worth noting. That's the good news. So a gratitude journal where somebody is asked to write down in a notebook with a pen, because that's a big difference than entering it in our phone. Our brains don't do as well in the latter as they do in the former. In fact, a study at St. Louis indicates that we're 40% more likely to accomplish things that we have written down than we are interfaced with a digital device. So with a pen and a journal, write down 10 things every day for which we are grateful, and do it every day, but we can never duplicate anything.
Mm.
And you'll see very quickly within about 4 days that we're not saying we're grateful for our family and our church and our home and faith and food. And now we're starting to listen for like the sound water pouring from the carafe into the teacup, and the look on a child's face when at play, or what it is like to watch one bird fly and land next to another one on a wire. We start to be really vigilant for what is beautiful, for which we can be grateful. So I think a gratitude practice like that radically changes the way our brains work. Literally, according to brain scans, change how the brain functions, how it's shaped. And so there's this thing that happens in the brain with negative thinking. The brain makes you more efficient to think negatively next time. So
Mhm.
there are these neuronal shortcuts and bridges, which means you're going to be negative. Great. I'll make it easier for you to do it the next time and the next time and the next time. And you know somebody who say about a beautiful day, well, it's going to be a beautiful day. It's very negative, even though the content is positive. Their brains are wired that way. We can just as easily, and it's not easy, rewire how we think by reframing how we think. And our brains will make those same neuronal shortcuts and bridges for positive thinking. And I think gratitude is the secret to that. Managing negativity, managing exposure to external information, and then a gratitude practice and scanning your life for what's good. Those are a couple of kind of psychological hacks that you can do to kind of get through this season. Physically, it's not rocket science. We've got to sleep. We have to sleep well, which means we have to be active. We have to get outside when we can, soak up the sun, get a boost in that serotonin. Yeah, at the end of the day, there are 4 things we like, all of us. We like serotonin, we like dopamine, we like endorphins, and we like oxytocin. And there are all these 4 hormones and chemicals in the brain. There are ways that we can give ourselves these things. Being out in sunlight, being with people who build us up, serotonin, scratching something off a to-do list, feeling accomplished, dopamine, being active, running, eating foods, dark chocolate, or a belly laugh, endorphins. And then oxytocin is that cuddle hormone, holding hands, hugging, being physically intimate or close with someone. We get our brain's needs met in those 4 ways. And if we can attend to those things in that ways, I think we just generally feel better. So better sleep, better exercise, and good nutritional eating in general. Stay connected with people you love, whether by phone, by Zoom, and let them know that you love them, let them know why you love them. And of course, some spiritual practices, journaling, praying, reading scripture and other secondary texts, and worship in whatever way that meets you. So while it's not overly complicated, we tend to kind of gloss over the simpler practices as if we have to spice those for something more rich or complex. But really, it's kind of simple. Connect with people you love, take care of your body, change how you think, and feed your soul with what you know is good for it. And like all stress, pandemic stress will find its way out the same way it found its way in.
Hmm. You know, one of the things I have found, Rich, and I may have said this before on one of these, but one of the secrets, one of the hacks, to use your term, I like that, that I have found is doing this. Talking to my friends, particularly those who are at some distance that I have not spent as much time with for that very reason. People talk about Zoom fatigue. That's a big thing in my community. I don't want to be on yet another Zoom. I don't want to be looking at a screen. I have discovered, at least my sense is that there's a huge difference at looking at 10 people or 8 people or 5 people on a screen for hours and looking at one person. And like, I don't see us using this medium that way very effectively. And I think it's very effective. So doing these coffee with Kyle things has been really cathartic for me. And that is the secret, that I'm doing this for me and everybody else gets to watch, right? But
Sure.
this opportunity to be face to face and one-on-one really feeds me. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about using it that way. And that's one of the things I would really offer up to people is, if you can't, if it feels like it's burdensome to get on the screen and do the Zoom thing, or however you meet virtually, try the one-on-one, try face to face. I mean, it's not in person, but when you're looking at somebody else and not looking at you as one block on a screen, which is what I think we do most often when we're just one-to-one, with another person, I think that makes a huge difference in the way that we're fed on these platforms. And so that's something I have really valued. But I'm really thankful for all those lifting up of the strategies. One of the things that I noted as you're talking, thinking about hug and connection, and that that feeling that we get. One of the things that people have really struggled with, the saddest statement I have heard this entire time, came from one of my members who said, "It's been 3 months since I've touched another person." And that was the most heart-wrenching thing that I have heard. It was so honest, so real, so immediate. And I wonder, for those people who maybe don't have the family at home, or who have really found
it's a lot of people
that way. There's so many. Is there anything specifically that you would lift up for those who might be kind of in that space of missing one of those 4 things that you lifted up for reasons beyond their control?
Yeah, I think about that. I think about people who are living alone, people who are living alone, are caring for someone, an aging parent, a sick spouse, or a special needs child, oftentimes an adult special needs child. So not only are we managing our own, but we're trying to help someone else manage theirs too. So whether we're alone or caring for someone, the tax we pay in those contexts can be far greater and feel so much harder for others who are maybe in a nuclear family setting and can still see each other and be with each other and play games. And I think the most important thing for people in that context is to utilize that connectivity that you just talked about and that I mentioned earlier. That we can be on the phone. For people who are willing to try the technology, really is blissfully easy to be able to do this, and to have someone maybe walk them through it. I've heard of churches and pastors who have done tutorials helping people to get online, to get on Zoom, to get on FaceTime or on Google Duo, be able to communicate with family members and friends. Game nights can be quite fun. I've heard of people who are playing bridge and Uno and Rummy on three or four different, screens for three or four different people on one screen, one device. I do think that there are, again, to use the word hacks, there's nothing that can really replace that. I remember being a pastor, and a woman would give me a hug on the way out after preaching every Sunday, and she said, "Well, this is my favorite time because it's the only time every week that I ever touch another person."
Mm.
And like you, my heart breaks for her, right? But at least then she was getting it once a week, and now there are people who aren't getting it at all. So there isn't really any substitute for that other than trying to connect it in any way that we can with the people who love us and whom we love. This is an important thing for parishioners to hear, because there are people like that within your context, and they may not have family either in touch or at all who can reach out and check in on them. And I think it's important that we take the responsibility to do that, to go and ring the doorbell and step back 15 feet and, have our mask on and keep our distance, but to be able to let someone know that, hey, I know that you're here and I love you and I miss you and I can't wait till we can be together like we have been. But in the meantime, what can I do for you? What can I bring you? What story do you have to tell me? There are ways to give ourselves what we need that are alternative in delivery of those goods, but the net effect is very close to being the same.
Yeah, I've talked about this as front porch sitting, particularly for a crowd who remembers maybe an era, or at least has some vague recollection of that time where people visited on front porches. I'm sure it was because they didn't have air conditioning inside or whatever, but that was the space that you met people. And in a time where our inside spaces don't feel safe or are uncomfortable, it doesn't even have to be the literal porch. I have a member, a dear friend who spends a lot of time sitting out in a lawn chair in his driveway, and I've had occasion to come and sit with him and visit with him, and that space is sacred. I mean, it's holy. It's not a new space for him, but it it's just carried a lot more importance through a difficult season in his life, and in this time where maybe being inside is just not the same. To visit outdoors, to
Mhm.
sit at a distance, and yet to really spend time with people is something that I think we
Mhm.
can do. I mean, everything, I guess, carries some inherent risk, but being outdoors and being at a distance mitigates a lot of that. And that time
Yeah.
has been really good for me. I have not done
Yeah.
anything like the normal amount of visiting that I normally would do as a pastor. A lot of it has been on the telephone. Most of it has been on the telephone. But
Yeah.
those things are important. I have conversations with people, and I get on the phone with them, and they'll talk my ear for an hour. And then I talk to other people, and this is probably more often the case. I'll talk to people, and our conversation will be a minute and a half. We don't necessarily have a
Mhm.
lot that we need to talk about or check in about, but just the fact that someone reached out and cared about them and offered themselves up in that way is meant, just from what I hear from people, is meant the
Mhm.
world to them. Just to know that there are people out there who are thinking about them and wondering how
Mhm.
they are. I just run down the directory of the church and just check in on people.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
been a really healthy practice, I think, during the pandemic, and one that, if we're smart, we'll keep doing long after this thing is
Yeah.
over.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. That in as much as it is stressful, there also are pretty healthy learning that come out of a time like this. And people, not everyone is depressed or anxious or afraid, although many are. Some have found new practices to be helpful. They have found a slowing down to be life giving. They have found a renewed interest in hobbies, in passions, and in creative outlets, and in with self. Again, detaching from maybe some kind of typical or normative ways of associating with the world, like with social media, and being quiet and getting still and enjoying nature and picking up a new hobby. So there have been gifts. Like everything, there's always something being born at the same time that something is dying. And so there is grief in one hand and there's gratitude in the other. And I think that that's the situation of our lives. That's the station in which we are in. And we do well to be mindful of both and to honor both and to regard both and to regard ourselves in it.
Mhm. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for spending some time with me doing this conversation and lifting up these things. I have found them incredibly helpful, and I hope that people who watch this will really connect with them. Do you have any final thoughts or any extra practice or recommendation that has popped into your mind, or anything else important you want to tell those who might be tuning in?
No, other than simply to encourage people to be gentle with themselves. Everybody grieves differently. Everybody experiences pandemic differently. Everybody feels differently, anxiety-wise and depression and gladness and hope. We all are different, and to honor the space between us and to be gentle ourselves and not to expect too much. Just to know that hopefully by practicing the guidance that's been handed down, most of us, if not all of us, can stay healthy and well, and that there will be some sense of normalcy to which we will return one day. And I hope that the normal we go back to is very different than the normal that we and that we claim some of these more beautiful and life-giving practices as our new normal, so that we're off having gone through this than we were before.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've got to pay attention to what is being born, to use your metaphor, and
Yeah.
not to throw it out and go back to something that maybe needed to die. That, I
Yeah.
think, is a really interesting challenge. And once we get through this, will be the next thing. I know that our impulse will be just to set life back up exactly like it was before. And if we do
Right.
that, this is time wasted and even destructive. So
Yeah.
part of the trick, part of the hack, I guess, is to do things in a way that set us up for newness and golly, and all the negativity. Maybe if we can learn to let go of some of that, we'll be better off. Thank you,
Mhm.
friend. Thanks for coming
Yeah.
and
Hey,
joining me
thanks
in
so much
this
for having me.
feature. And we really just appreciate you. And best of luck in your practice. And I hope you and your wonderful family stay well. Thanks again.
And
This
to
has
you
been,
too. Thank you.
you're,
Thank you
wel-
for having me.
you're welcome. Well, this has been Morning Coffee with Kyle and my friend Jonathan. Take care.